The longer I take, the faster I'll talk. So my name is Nate Lee. I appreciate everyone attending today. Hopefully you've had a great conference so far. I know that we're just before lunch, so if you need to caffeinate, stand up, do jumping jacks or something like that, feel free to do so. I'll do my best not to be just monotone and just prattle on about stuff, because I'm sure everyone enjoys that. So I'll try to keep this lively, interesting. I'll try to keep it condensed down so there's enough time to ask a lot of questions at the end. First and foremost is that the why you should listen to me slide. I've been doing this for a very long time with a lot of large companies. So I was the data governance leader for Yahoo for a little bit over a year and a half. And that was during the transition where they were purchased, bought, and sold by Verizon, like a deck of cards that were getting folded. And beyond that is also working with other large names and consulting with other companies. And I have run the gambit. I'm a recovering engineer myself, so I take a data perspective, but to try to put it into human-friendly terms, because I have been within the business operations part of organizations. And so I've operated data governance out of like the three major areas, out of the finance legal area, out of the business itself, and then also within the data CDO/CIO areas. So there's troughs and tribulations no matter where you go. And I want to be very clear about what our purpose and outcomes here. Any one of these single bullet points I'm about to show you on when we start to dig into the slide deck here is a full 45-minute conversation. I cannot help you solve all of your problems and everything that you're going to have to do when you have to reboot data governance. I'll cover the high-level topics. This is something that would be great for a half-day or full-day session. Tell Dataversity that. And then it would be something that we can start to delve into if there's specific areas of interest. I'll leverage as much of my experience and pragmatic information that I can to help you along. Again, if you have detailed questions, please feel free to ask, but do realize also that there's a lot of material, and there may be different areas that different folks want to dive into details a bit. And first, let's start off with a couple of slides around just philosophy, because who doesn't like talking about philosophy when you're talking about data governance? The two major pieces here in rebooting data governance that I've seen just drives the organization and engagement is you have to view your data as a product. It's an asset, absolutely. But if you don't have a product management mindset and framework around the way that you utilize your data, the way that you engage with your business partners or your customers, right? Because it's not just your internal business, it's also external business. You're going to have problems. And so it's what I refer to as the product management bookends that you put all around your projects. And that's how do you set up your engagement plan? How do you charter out? How do you decide what's the iterations that you're going to go through to actually do the work? And then at the tail end, where's your behavioral metadata? Is anyone using what you just built? Is there engagement? What does it look like? Those are common pieces where I see data governance, and the ones that I come in basically on a salvage mission, right, at ground zeros in certain instances, to go back and recover because they did not engage their partners. And then the second part is that your data governance is a service, right? It's like a SaaS platform. You have to be able to engage, understand what the capacity is, understand what your load looks like. And then you also, again, as I've stated previously, you have to think beyond your go live. This has to be maintained in the long run. If you set it up in a way that's not going to be operationally feasible moving forward, it will fail. And I've seen organizations do that also. And then you want to, and as I mentioned with the product management bookends, is that you absolutely have to measure the sentiment and the utility. Is this useful for you? Believe me, your business will tell you if you ask them, is this good or not? They're more often than not, you're going to hear, no, I don't like it. That's great. That's who you go after to get those requirements, because those curmudgeons are gold. As it was said this morning in the keynote, provocateurs, right? Those are the folks that you want to talk to, because they're the ones that are going to be the best advocates once they get engaged with you, hopefully. So the first question I always get is, where does data really provide value? And I think that John Lally in his book on data governance does a fabulous job describing it. And so I'm just going to provide a quick summary right here. It provides value around process, because if you document your process and you have the information around standards and policy, and then it drives everything. If you have, it drives your competitive position. It allows you to understand how can you utilize your data in new and different ways that's hard to replicate. First-party data and I'm sure you've heard this in the magazines and such, first-party data these days is gold. Why? Because it's not in the generative AI models. It's private. It's held. What can you do with the data that you have? It's not about gathering more data at this point. It's not a matter of scale in most organizations. It's around extensibility. How can you use your data in new and different ways that gives you a competitive advantage? Governance actually drives a lot of that too. Your products and service. If you're not utilizing your data to actually create that virtuous cycle from feedback and providing that loop back into your organization as to how you're going to actually drive engagement with your customers or your services, right? Again, it's something where it's absolute, and these are areas that you can focus on. And this will tie back into something later on. And then also your assets and intellectual capital. Are you leveraging your IP properly, right? I can give you a prime example. I worked at this company called Yahoo, little internet company. Their IP portfolio was worth billions during the mid-2000s, but it wasn't kept up. It's called Excalibur if anyone wants to look at what's in there. And feel free, I encourage you to. But because they didn't keep it on the cutting edge, their intellectual capital actually decreased over time. Their ability to innovate decreased over time. And the majority of what they worked through was released to open source. Give away your competitive advantage right off the bat. It's kind of weird. But it improved the whole economy and the economics around the internet itself. But at what cost? Also, it's an enabler. I like to use this, I like to put enabler here in this front and center. And the reason why is because I always get the question, well, what do you mean by enablement? You have all this other cool stuff. Data enables all activities. Data without context is meaningless. If you're able to, if there's questions that you can't answer with your data, then the question should be, how do I gather the data I need to help answer that question and to enable the business process, to enable innovation? And I think that that's a key, especially as we talk about data governance. And it's also a risk mitigation tool, is that if you don't have data around how your data is being accessed, well, you don't have access rights controls. That's a massive risk. Privacy, massive risk. But those aren't just negative risks. What are the positive risks that you can actually mitigate, encourage within your organization? Well, if we have duplicate data sets, as you heard during the last discussion, how do we actually identify that we have these duplicates? And then what's that source moving forward? What's the holding cost, going old school with inventory, right? What's the holding cost of that data? Is it sitting in a SaaS cloud that's active, it's hot all the time? That's incredibly expensive. So that actually ties into where data governance provides value. And that's a mesh. You can create this nice little 6 by 6 or 12 by 12 matrix and go, okay, where do my projects fit? This is really simple stuff, right? And the reason why I go through this simple stuff is because there's varying levels of maturity, and it sets the baseline for what I'm about to discuss. Revenue generation. You can make a lot of money if you know how, if you leverage data governance properly. It also provides improved efficiencies. I mentioned the duplication of data. Well, where's our analytics engines? What do the views look like? Are there expiration dates on our models? That last one, bit Yahoo in the ass. I can say that, right? Well, I did, right? But it bit Yahoo in the bottom. Why? Because you had salespeople that were using models that were built 5 years prior, using data sets that didn't have, I would say, the best quality, and they reused it. There wasn't an expiration date on that model. And there was a portfolio of over 20,000 data models that were built. So that was an area of cleanup. So it's also improving those efficiencies around that. Risk mitigation, I already mentioned that on the previous slide, but it's not just about how do you avoid negative risks. It's identifying positive risk and encouraging them, again, to provide the efficiencies, to provide better process and clarity. It also improves your customer experience. If you can get your site to load faster, it makes a lot of people happy. But it's more than just that. It's how do we actually leverage the information around how our users are experiencing the offering that we have, whether it's a product, a home, such as what Cave Hovnanian does. We build houses and communities. How do we get that feedback into our system and utilize it to actually improve the customer experience? How do we identify where we have issues that are consistent or that creates that data trend? And how do we correct it? And then, of course, improve data trust, data quality left, right, and in the middle. If you don't have data quality in your scope when you're attempting to institute or reboot data governance, you're not going to succeed. It is the first best way to provide incremental value. You can quote me on that. I'm sure someone else has that quote too. And then finally is data security. It's not just around access rights management. A famous quote, and I think it was Peter Aiken that said this. I might be wrong, so don't quote me on this. Quote him, is that data should be secure. It should not be hidden. How many folks have data silos? Your data's hidden. It doesn't mean that I can go in and start querying out and seeing all the content, but at least I need to know what the hell's there. And so with those types of premise, we can start talking about the summarization of this philosophical approach, which is you have to align what you're doing to your corporate outcomes, right? And there's a separate presentation I did at EDW last June, I believe, June-July timeframe. If you don't have access to it, happy to share it with you. It actually dives into the ROI of data governance, and it talks about these things in depth. But you have to identify what those needs are, and then make sure that what you're going to build out for data governance, especially if you're salvaging what's been done before, figure out what they did and didn't do. Second is that you don't want to implement anything that doesn't actually solve issues. Now, to be cautious with this, we're not talking about just doing stuff that only today tactically will solve the problems. It's building up your capabilities to be able to solve those problems. But you want to start out saying we're going to have positive engagement. There's a new sheriff in town, whatever your analogy or colloquialism is, and then start providing that value. But you have to focus on actual data issues. If you say, hey, we're just going to write up a whole bunch of policies, standards, and processes, yee-haw, right? No one's going to engage with you. You're not solving their problems. In fact, you're doing the opposite of enabling. You're actually setting up potential roadblocks. That's how it'll be seen, the thou shalt and thou shalt not, right? Come down from the mount after talking to the data governance burning bush. Sorry to go biblical. But you don't want to go that path. Identify the problems, act as a product manager, and start to work through how do you solve them. And then passive data governance tactics, they rarely produce results. Hey, we have a data governance council meeting, it's every bi-weekly, and it turns into a status meeting. Anyone? That's exactly the wrong way to do it. You have to actively manage it because those should be decisioning meetings. Nothing gets brought up there except for to actually drive towards a decision. Setting up your meetings and driving with intention is absolutely paramount. Because if they say, well, it doesn't work. Well, why doesn't it work? Because all we do is talk about stuff. We don't really do anything. Well, flip the script. So, and then we also have the key to a successful governance program is, again, this is another one of those generic cliches, right? You want to have the right people in the right roles with the right organizational structure. And we'll talk about that as we move forward here. The organizational structure, in my opinion, is actually the most important aspect here. Because if you're not organized in a way to support data governance, whether it's, and I prefer a federated approach, so that way you give leeway and grace to the departments to be able to manage them for themselves, and you educate them and upskill them as you move forward, I believe gets the best form of engagement. And then finally, you have to balance out tactical wins in the short term with the more longer term investments. You can't do one or the other. If it just goes completely tactical, certainly, hey, they're doing a great job, but then you're going to lose that product focus. Are you maturing the organization? Are you building the capabilities that are necessary for them to get for the organization to get those next levels? And we'll talk about maturity in a second here. So this is the philosophical approach for what we're about to talk about. This is how you do it. This is how you do data governance, right? The problem is that most organizations don't go, okay, are we done with number one? Okay, let's go to number two. Let's go to number three. Let's go to number four. And in fact, when you're recovering a data governance organization or an implementation, you're usually starting where hey, we did 8. We did a tool assessment. We brought in one of these vendors. No vendors in the room right now? Good. So we brought in this tool. It's supposed to kick butt. We have no way of knowing how we're going to use it, who our subject matter experts are in the organization, how we're going to actually perform literacy, et cetera. Or more often, you'll have a set of you'll have a populated operating model. You'll start having maybe some policies and procedures that have been built out, right? But are they valid still? Strategies themselves have to be revisited and make sure that you remain on the mark. Now, as I said, any one of these bullet points is a full 45-minute discussion. I'm going to try to burn through some high-level stuff here on each of these. If one of these areas is something that you're interested in, please feel free to ask questions as we move through. because I got about 20 minutes of speaking time before we get to Q&A. All right, so let's roll forward, shall we? These are the areas that I'm going to cover in this discussion. If there's something that's not highlighted here, that's not an area of focus, we have time here at this conference. I'm sure everyone's here tomorrow, I hope, and I'll be happy to talk with you at your leisure. All right, so 1, identify and prioritize data issues. I cannot believe how many organizations I've stepped into as a director, as a governance leader, even as a consultant, where this has never been done. Or they said, well, they complain about data quality. Okay, well, that's a functional definition. Let's operationalize it. What about data quality do they have problems with? And more often than not, it's not that there's an issue with the data itself. It's that the organization that is complaining doesn't know where the data comes from. They have no data insights. They just have a report that's canned that they just get and they go, well, how can I trust the data? I don't know where it comes from. So I always take that farm to table approach. Let's highlight exactly where our data comes from. Here's your report. Let's trace back the lineage. Here's the views it comes from. Here are the calculations. And by the way, let's fold in a business glossary to make sure that when we say this thing on the report, this is what it means, right? But you have to identify these data issues and you have to document them as you would with any other project. Data governance is not this different magical unicorn. It can be made into one, but it's more often than not has to still abide by the same standards as any other project. If you're going to perform improvements, you have to identify the requirements, and then you have to know what success looks like. And who determines that? Data governance? No, your customers. What does success look like? How will we know that we've crossed the finish line? How do we know that you're happy, right? How many folks ask their partners this in organizations? Yeah, see, I only saw like 2 hands, right? And this isn't an inquisition, right? But it's incredibly important to have those discussions up front and early as possible, because if you don't know what success looks like, you're going to continue to iterate and iterate and iterate on the same issues. And then, of course, they say perfect is the enemy of good. When's good enough? And then deciding jointly what that objective and key result looks like, because guess what? They share that key result. They have to do, and why? Because I heard this too. This is actually a question from a senior vice president. Why should they share in your OKR for data governance? Because what's their incentive? Let's tie a bonus to it. Let's tie a departmental bonus to doing this work because they need it. If they need it, then let's put our money where our mouth is, right? In the land of, well, I was about to say, use the old Scrum methodology, which is the old pigs and chicken thing. In a world of pigs and chickens, we're all going to be pigs, right? That means we have our bacon on the line. It comes from a certain part of the animal. Anyways, the important part here is that we have to share in that responsibility. So having a shared set of OKRs as we talk through what are these overarching problems that we need to solve is of paramount importance. Absolutely. Yes?
We sort of see problems of data between local problems of data, right? So one thing is somebody goes up to the chief procurement and says, I can do a lot of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Chief procurement says, all our vendors are talking bad, data's bad, data's bad.
Right.
So it takes some project to take you to find out what's not. How do you avoid this and how do you sort of close that out?
Great question. So the question was, how do you identify real data problems versus ones that are imagined? Or I'll use the GPT term, hallucinated, right? Because I like that term. So the answer to that is that it takes time to dig into it. But it doesn't mean that that's automatically the first item that you go and dig into. You build your backlog, and then you prioritize with your data governance council or your steerco. I prefer to call my steercos, I don't have data owners. I prefer to call them trustees. Why? Because they're operating and owning the data and acting upon it for the best benefit of the organization. Dramatically different than data ownership. Why? It's mine. I own it. I'm the gatekeeper. It's mine, right? So in that way is that it goes up to a board of trustees. It's not up to a chief product officer or a CFO unless they really yell and they pay to play. If they say, hey, I'm going to give you all the budget you need to help me solve my problem. Heck yeah, right? But it's important to have it so it's organizationally a backlog that's viewable and decisioned upon by an executive team. They are the ones that decide what the scope is. Now, you can highlight and say, and again, we'll go into maturity assessment here in a moment. You can say, here are the items that we have. Here's what we see as the priority and severity as we understand it currently. And we will give it a cross-functional team. Again, that's where the stewardship leads. And cross-functional stewardship teams, you can call them Tiger teams, you can call them Kanban teams, you can call them Kaizen teams, whatever you like. I've heard them called hit squads too. I'm like, all right, kind of aggressive, but I like it. So as long as you have the awareness at the executive level, and then also within the Data Governance Council on how that decisioning is happening, you can also say, here's the line in the sand, right? So let's give it 3 months. Let's do the investigation. Is it a data cleansing issue? Is it is it just a matter of understanding where the data comes from? That's first and foremost when we talk about data quality for me, is that do we have line of sight into our data sets? Because if we don't, then that's where you start, right? But that's an excellent question, because you will get mired down into something that again, an executive says it's extremely important. If it's that important, then pay for it. That usually stops it right there. Well, I don't know, and the hands will fold, right? But if they say, no, it's your job to do this, well, let's take that to the executive committee and let's make sure that everyone's aligned on it, because there's an opportunity cost with us focusing on what you've just asked for. And don't do it blindly. Gather the requirements, get line of sight, and then make the determination on what action needs to be taken. So it's a great question. That's absolutely a paramount importance. So moving right along is that you have to identify and prioritize data issues. That's exactly ties in. I appreciate that question. It ties right into this. I always like to think of it as urgency and importance, as I mentioned. What's the priority and what's the severity? And different data problems fall within different quadrants. What are the ones you want to take care of? Well, most folks would say, oh, it's absolutely number one because of the urgency and da-da-da-da. Well, sometimes there are dependencies that are down here in quadrant 4 or even over in quadrant 2 that have to be resolved in order to fix a problem in quadrant 1. So for each of these data issues, you want to have, again, this is basic requirements gathering, right? If you look up PMI's PMP or even CDMP, it tells you to do this, right? And it's boring as hell, and it's not easy. It's not something that ChatGPT can step in and resolve for you yet. But it's absolutely important that you sit and actually think through this and have the business actively participate in this. So that way you're not seen as someone that's just barging in, kicking down their doors and saying, I'm here to solve your problems, tell me what's wrong, right? They have to be active participants in the process. And that's part of the agreement process as you set up your organizational design, that you have those subject matter experts, Data Governance Council members, stewardship leads, subject matter experts, whatever you like to call them. They have to be actively participating. And so you're not going to solve all of these urgent and on high priority issues at the same time. It has to be rank ordered, but you have to gather the requirements. Even if it's just the problem statement and, hey, we don't have time to talk about it. If you don't have time to talk about it, I don't have time to fix it, right? Sounds like kind of a hard line. It is. But at the same time is that it can't solve everything all at once. And so, but building this backlog is going to assist you in helping to rationalize what are you going to do first? What is going to provide the biggest bang for the buck in the short term? What do we need to do now to start solving dependencies to actually mature and actually add capabilities to the organization and balance it? Not everything's a long-term investment. But what's really important is that, again, the stack ranking process, because if you don't stack rank, you can't build your roadmap unless it just comes out of your head. And I've seen folks do that. Rarely works. The roadmap gets adjusted again and again and again. Don't build your roadmap until you've sat down and gone through those rationalization exercises and say, here's exactly what we're going to work on. Visibility and transparency in data governance, not just for the data, but for how you're actually operating. You'll get such appreciation from the business units that go, and I've heard this so many times, it's heartbreaking to have business units say, this is the first time that anyone from the finance organization, anyone from the IS organization has come and reached out to us. This is the first time that we're seeing any of this. That's sad, but it's necessary. So there's a ton of things that can go into this. What are some common ones, very quickly? Mention data quality, data cleansing, data hygiene, data awareness, right? Having transparency and visibility of the data structures as built currently. If you don't have data models, if you don't have entity relationship diagrams, et cetera, if you don't know what your business views are that are actually driving your reports, if you don't know what your list of canned reports are, where are your eKPIs, your enterprise KPIs being derived from? What's reporting out on them? All of those. Just document it. Business glossary, data dictionaries, right? All of this feeds into it. But in addition to that, you can say, well, we need to take a look at our reporting. We need to rationalize where our data is stored. We need to rationalize our data visualization tool sets. There's tons of different areas. But I can't tell you, here's exactly the way to do it because it's dependent upon the needs of your organization. If you don't gather requirements, if you don't stack rank, if you don't do that, you cannot identify properly what the priorities are. It's going to be the squeaky wheel getting the grease, and the cart goes sideways. So everyone should see this simplified pie over here. That is, of course, the Dama wheel. It's a simplified version of it. I've heard that data governance actually sits on the outside and data strategy sits in the middle. Either way works. But you need to create that charter and you need to start building policies for data governance. Why? Because that is where you point and say, this is how we operate. I prefer to start off the policies with principles. And what do the principles mean? Well, they're incontrovertible, general, human-friendly statements, which that sentence wasn't. So what do I mean by that? I'll throw out a couple. I'll start with something that everyone will, these are prima facie statements that everyone will agree to. And if they don't, people will look at them like they have crabs growing out of their ears. For instance, we believe that we as the company need to maximize the value of our data. Does anyone disagree? Well, how are we going to do that? Well, what does that mean, right? That's the next statement. Here's what we mean by that. Here's the functional statement. Here's the capabilities that will unlock our ability to do this. And then you factor in what projects, programs, et cetera, you're going to implement to actually drive that principle. What are some other ones? We believe that our data should have inherent trust and quality throughout the entire, and you can use data management lifecycle, ecosystem, et cetera. You can use those statements. Why say that? Is anyone going to disagree that they don't believe that we should have data quality, that we shouldn't trust our data? Absolutely not. They're crazy, right? So having these types of general statements that are human-friendly, that actually drive towards the business objectives and goal and easily align into strategy at the corporate level or the enterprise level allows you to have those more in-depth conversations. And it does something extremely important I think we forget about as data governance experts and professionals. It inspires aspirational thinking. Think of the possible, we can call it the growth mindset. There's a dozen different terms out there. But if your business, if your teams aren't poised to think, how can we solve this problem in creative new ways? If we're not able to innovate, data governance is going to be incredibly tough. Why? This is the way we've always done it. There's a better way. So it's a matter of sitting down together and figuring out what that better way is. And if they can't, well then, what's preventing them from doing that? And that's where the organizational issues usually come in. So with the policies, you want to start off with, again, very general, very simple, no more than a page, 2 pages tops for the initial policies. Keep them simple, keep them readable, because if you start out and you go the way of Verizon, which I worked at, their policy book was intense. There was one dot one dot one dot one dot one dot one dot dot dot. It looked like an IPv6 like IP address. It was ridiculous. Did anyone actually read that stuff? No, but it looked great for the regulators, right? You want to start off with something that's human-friendly, that folks will read and say, I understand what you're trying to do here, because that's what the intention of policies are. Then you build your standards. Then you build your processes from them. So beyond that is that it really just needs to dictate how you're going to operate. You align to the principles and say, our principles are this, here's our policies. Our policies align to at least 2 of these principles that we've set. And if you have 6, say 3, right? Because if they don't, then you don't have your own alignment. And if you don't have value alignment within your organization, data governance, data quality, data management, master data management, core data management, whatever you like to call it, then you can't get alignment to the rest of the organization. So that's where policies are extremely important. It's basically, here's how we're going to do business. Here's how we're going to interact with you. And at the same time, it gives everyone an understanding of what your purpose and intentions are. So in that way, they don't have to come to you every single day and say, Nate, tell me a little bit more about this magnificent thing called data governance. Did you read the manual? I don't say that, but yes, in fact, go and take a look at this and let me know if you have questions. So, selecting an operating model. I believe that everyone in this room has heard of, seen, or something around Robert Snyder's pyramid, the organizational pyramid. Anyone not seen this before, ever? Anyone? Okay. This is like the bread and butter. When we talk about non-invasive data governance, which is, again, a copyrighted and patented thing from Rob Schneider, is that it sets up an organization in a way to allow you to engage at different levels depending on the objective of the data governance activity that you're about to undertake. So does it mean that you say, oh, well, everything's strategic and enterprise? Absolutely not. Because, sorry, cameraman, I'm going off the stage. All right. Because when we talk about strategic and enterprise, you see that the escalation process goes up and down, and we also have communications. So this vertical communication is extremely important because it not just provides alignment when you talk about goals, objectives, it shows that you have leaders that are there, present, actively participating, and they can act as the stick that allows you to provide that carrot to everyone. If you're not familiar, you want to encourage that positive activity, etc. Leave it to the higher ups to actually be the bad guys. Works for the military. So what we have here is you have these different support levels. So you can see them that they cut across and that you can see you go from an executive to strategic, tactical, and operational. Now, does that mean that you have to have a 4-layer cake whenever you're doing your organizational design? Absolutely not. But you do have to have a separation of responsibilities. You can't have the stewardship teams making executive decisions unless you have that. So if you have an empowered organization like that, kudos. But it's not something that can usually do. So you absolutely want to make sure that you have operational and tactical levels when you're talking through what are we going to be doing today, tomorrow, what's in progress. Just because you're recovering an organizational endeavor doesn't mean you just pump the brakes on everything. What's in process? Is it organized? Do we have goals that we're attempting to accomplish and then driving those forward? And then when we talk about the more strategic and executive levels, this is how you get your engagement. What's the first best way to get engagement with the executives? I'll say this, and this is possibly open up a debate for later on, but KPIs. Standardize and certify your enterprise KPIs. That is their bread and butter. That is what their performance, their bonuses, their ESPP or their stock program is based upon. It's hitting those corporate goals. Those corporate goals, if they don't align to what you're doing down here, they're not going to support you. So the first thing you want to do is say, let's make sure that everyone understands exactly what we mean when we say EBITDA, right? Or if we have a term that is going to be our enterprise KPI. Does everyone have that same understanding? Does everyone know how it's calculated? Are we talking, when we say revenue, are we talking gross revenue? We're talking net revenue? Huge difference. And then, of course, by doing that, it allows you to also set up what? Your business glossary? Because those definitions have to go somewhere and make it widely accessible. We are doing this to make sure that everyone knows what you want us to do. Change control. What happens if someone wins the lottery as an executive? And again, I like that versus hit a bus because that's really negative. But if someone wins the lottery and they leave the organization, what happens to their KPIs? Change management. Who owns it now? What if we change the report? What if we change the filters? What if we change the source of the report? Shit, what if we have a brand new data set that we want to incorporate into that calculation? I just listed off 5. Those are the core, really. So that's what you are able to do, and the executives will sponsor it. Why? Because if their KPIs change and they're not aware of it, then it's on their heads. So what you're doing is you're doing risk management with the executives or the business or the organizational leaders, et cetera. So that's just one example, but you also have the supporting levels, and you can see that you have your partners, your team, and et cetera, working teams. You can have executives that actually will attend your working meetings. I think that's personally dangerous, but it shows that there's direct line of sight and support. They are present because they're helping to solve the problem. But you have to set up the roles and responsibilities right out of the box. Because if you don't, and you have an executive that participates at the low level of stewardship directly, it's going to be seen by the rest of the subordinates, the folks that don't have that VP title or what have you, as They're here to tell us exactly what to do. And that is not the intention of stewardship. In fact, in an organization that I'm at now, I'm actually implementing this separation. Because the business partners feel that when a question is asked around, say, analytics, well, they go to the executives. Executives, what do you want from your analytics? Well, this is what I want. That's top of the pyramid, right? So what does it actually take to from an operational standpoint to support that? Do we even have the transactional data? I love this pyramid because it does everything, right? But do we have that? And the answer more often than not is no. So we're just going to give this dashboard view. We don't know about the backing here, et cetera. So what came up from the business was, well, whenever we are asked, it's basically our SVP or a CEO, et cetera, that says, here's what I want. And no one comes back down to ask us what we need. How are we going to support this and operationalize it, right? So I said, look, we're going to put in a separate little layer here, right? And that's where actually the executive steering committee came into play. That's our data trustee board. What do they own? They own the KPIs to start, and we expand the roles and responsibilities from there. Why? Because if they're in the same room with someone that's a senior manager, an analyst, they're going to be those analysts are going to wait to receive direction from that executive. In the famous words of the offspring, you got to keep them separated. At least here. I appreciate those that smiled at that stupid joke. So, create and conduct an assessment and gap analysis. There's a couple of different models out there. There's this old school CMMI, which works. But you also have some different models that are out there around when you have maturity. Why is this important? Because it'll help to drive some of the needs analysis that you have. What are the areas that you want to focus upon? Well, there's a lot. So if you can utilize the dim box structure to ask questions around activities. To what degree is this activity or process in place? Is it even documented? If it's not documented, guess what? Zero. Zero. It sounds harsh, but it's like, look, we have to be honest. In the same way that data governance, when done properly, uncovers a massive amount of tech debt, it uncovers a massive amount of governance, policy, audit debt simultaneously. And it's important to have that realization, but to actually document it in an objective fashion. The assessments are absolutely necessary to say, look, it's not me saying it. It's a framework that is widely accepted, and you told us this is your capability level by virtue of these measures.
Is there a place to get that assessment?
Oh, absolutely. CMMI, it's a widely accepted standard, let me see here, Capability Maturity Measurement Index, I believe is what it's called, or inventory. Yeah, I've heard inventory and index used interchangeably. It's, Capability Maturity Measurement Index, or I've heard it called also inventory. IBM's been using the CMMI model since the 60s. So there are other presentations that actually dive into that. I actually do have a couple of documents that could assist with that, so let's connect and we'll talk through that. But this gap analysis piece is extremely important because folks will say, here's where we aspire to be, right? Well, how far off are we? Just making sure that we're on time. And I got about 5 minutes left, so I apologize. So the big thing here is that you want to ensure that that there's an understanding with the parts of the organization that you're going through and performing this task. What are the areas that you want to explore? Of course, your data management, reporting, analytics, the KPIs, OKRs, the measurements. So you have a whole bunch of different ways that the areas that you want to investigate. But those investigations also can drive the requirements gathering and vice versa. They build off of each other. So as you're performing this capability and maturity analysis, you're gathering requirements. The fact that I see these as distinct things, well, we have to do this until we do this, absolutely not. If folks say, I don't have time for this requirements gathering process, well, we need to do a capabilities assessment. Do you mind? Well, no. Well, why do you need this? Well, because it's going to help us determine what we need to do to help you. Well, absolutely. Requirements gathering time. So you want to populate your operating model is another big piece here. You saw that pyramid previously, steering committee, data governance office. I like to just refer to what the work that my organization that I own is doing. And so I refer to it as just a DGO, right? And then you have your council, your support team at the tactical level, and then implementation, the business as usual or the data governance team. How do we sustain moving forward? I believe in a federated model. Centralized, I have not seen that work except for highly regulated organizations, fintech, medical, rocketry, actually. So I've seen it operate properly in that with a centralized model, but more often than not, you will not have the budget, you will not have the personnel or the resources to drive a centralized model. Totally decentralized, I've never seen that work, frankly, in the long term. I've seen it from an M&A perspective, tell us what you're doing, let's get it, and then it slides into a federated model. Federated model allows the teams that know their systems, that know their data, that know their rules to act and provide their expertise into the structure. So you want to create an implementation roadmap based upon your prioritized data problems. This is after you've met with the executives, after you've already set up your data governance council and may have had some initial decisions. And I like to split it up into simple categories to say, look, we're going to work on either operations, infrastructure, compliance, security. Yours might be different. It might have data quality as the top line. Absolutely, do it. It may be that you need to talk about analytics. Well, is that really operations or is it something that we're dealing with brand new? Or areas for improvement there. But you absolutely want to ensure that you define what the business impact is going to be. And then that will assist in the stack ranking. Stack ranking comes before this, but you want to review this with your steerco. If you call it a trustee board, steerco, et cetera, you need to review this with them. Because they say, well, you know, I don't know if we have time to do this. We can't engage with you because of X, Y, and Z. Fantastic. Your item gets pushed out. What do we replace it with? Right? If you don't have those discussions, you need to have the right people and the right roles at the right time to do this work. So finally, you want to begin a phased implementation. Big bang processing within data governance, I have very rarely, I can't say never because I've seen it work twice. It's very tough unless you have massive support and communication coming from the executive staff. It's incredibly difficult. So incremental progress is the best way to move forward. Why? Because we always talk about, and this is on an impediment slide that's coming up here in about 2 minutes, which is, we always talk about boiling the ocean. I've heard that damn analogy so often, it sickens me. It really does. Who wants to go and boil out that garbage patch out in the Pacific? They are cleaning it up. I've heard it's gotten a lot better. But who wants to do that? Instead, I use a phrase from Sanskrit, it turns out. Because I have a lot of friends that are Hindustani or Indian, right? And it's this phrase, Tipe, Tipe, Sarvam Bharai. Now, if you don't speak Gujarati or Sanskrit, let me translate it for you. In English, it says, drop by drop, we fill the lake. That's what I say. When someone says we're boiling the ocean, no, we're not. We choose what we're going to put in the lake in the same way that we choose what we put in the data lake. We choose what we're going to implement, and we choose together what we're going to work on, and we fill it ourselves. But it requires a good deal of coordination. And again, the solves aren't just for data governance. You're enabling other areas. It may not be a direct, hey, we're building this data governance capability to do X, Y, and Z. We're improving the operations of our analytics systems because it'll unlock our capability to have more trust in our data. Partner. Balance and partner. So let's talk through a couple of real quick, and I say quick with like 2 minutes left, and I apologize, I got long-winded on the philosophy. One, tooling first data governance. This is actually at an organization I was previously at. You can stalk my LinkedIn and you can find out who they are. Their focus was upon strategic alignment with leadership on the KPI standardization and certification process. Fantastic. The problem is that there wasn't an organizational model, there weren't policy documents, there weren't process documents. They said, we're going to solve everything by having a tool set without having any sort of organizational structure. What do you think happened? It fell flat on its face. And it was a massive investment. In fact, one of those vendors is here this week, which I don't name in my LinkedIn, fortunately. But how do we actually go about resolving it? And that's the reason why I also like this diagram, because it shows you, here's what we did at what level to actually resolve. Is that one, we changed that focus from being this tool first, let's do business glossaries and data dictionaries first, because we don't have any idea what our systems are doing, right? Into, let's focus on the KPIs. Ready engagement, absolutely, let's do that. We want our bonus money. Two, was we worked with the data stewards to define the business glossaries and enable the business definitions and calculations for KPIs. I used ChatGPT because they said we have 2,000 terms that haven't been updated since 2019, and we don't want to go back and do it again because that stuff sucks. That's a quote. that sucks. So what did I do? I said, okay, bet. Did some prompt engineering, used ChatGPT, said, please help me define these things. Your role as ChatGPT is a CTO that is an expert in data governance. Here's the investor history of the organization itself. Here's some examples of known good statements. And here's the structure I expect to have returned for each one of these definitions. Spat it out. Took that business glossary in front of the business and said, look, the bots told me that this is what your definitions are. I don't trust it. I need your help to actually validate this. It was about 90% right. But it was that whole Tom Sawyer fake out thing, right? When he's painting the fence. Anyone remember? You have to make it so that you utilize the capabilities that are present to actually ease the burden and make it interesting. I don't trust the bots. Here's what the bots told us. Can you guys check? Because I don't know, they might have hallucinated, right? Absolutely, I'll tell you those bots are wrong. And guess what we got at the end of it? All of our definitions were standardized. Took less than a month because there's such active engagement. How did you do it? What's the prompt look like? Data science was super interested too. What did you do? How do you know it's right? I don't, that's why I'm asking you for help. But it's also a partner system that actually for the owners to drive the enablement of data management through the use of the catalog and lineage. They got super excited again, we changed out the tool set, right? But they were excited to say, here's what our lineage overall looks like. This is where your reports are. Here's what's in those reports. Here's how you can trace it back into the views, back into the curation layer within our data lake. Here's where it comes from. Super powerful. Why? Because the majority, in my opinion, of data quality issues aren't because the data is necessarily bad. Granted, there are instances of that, more than there should be, but it's because of a lack of understanding of the data structures itself. I don't know what's there. Show them. Show them. Show your work, right? So I know that we're at time, I believe, but let me just go through a couple more things. One, when we have tooling first, it's called the field of dreams approach. Build it and they will come. It almost always fails because it does not incorporate what the business value is. It does not incorporate what problems you're necessarily going to be solving. It does not have the structure, organizational, operational structure behind it to be able to enable it in the long term. And then again, it's just hoping that everyone's going to have the same context and common understanding when you've never focused on literacy or knowledge management. Doesn't work. So I'll just end here because I do have a couple of other examples. Feel free to download the deck and look at the other examples I have. But really, these are the common impediments that I've seen over the past 20 years plus. It's the not understanding the what's in it for me. That's what the WIFM is. I find that that's actually one of the more often ones, is that we don't actually identify why are we doing this? Why are we doing data governance? Yeah, we'll have better quality data, but why? What is the impact to the business? How does it help me? And that what's in it for me is a huge one also. Again, all of these are issues that we have around the structure, siloed data, decisioning making that's occurring. So there's a lot of different avenues but if you identify these, then think through how do we actually go back and unwind this. And it's usually going back to square one and saying, help me understand what your requirements are to help you solve this mindset. Because you're going to have advocates in the organization. You have to find those advocates. They may not have the SVP and VP titles, but they are the ones that are orchestrators. They're the ones that are influencers. You have to find and interconnect those folks that are passionate provocateurs, using the phrase from today, that will be able to engage and work together. Because when you do that through virtue of stewardship program, data governance councils, they produce gestalt results because they're trying to do the right thing, but they're doing it by themselves. Have them connect, have them work together, because when they work together, the results they produce are going to be astronomically better and have a better chance of engagement and also of producing the results that you expect if they are trying to do it alone, because they will become discouraged and they'll say, well, I can do one of two things. I can leave because I'm so frustrated, seen it happen, done it myself. Or they may say, well, you know what? I'm just going to sit here hands folded because you know what? It's not really my job. How disheartening is that? And we have the ability to actually connect these folks together, to actually have them work together, to actually produce the results that's going to drive the entire organization forward. Identify them, recognize the work that they're doing, and ensure that they're incentivized to do the work. All right. I apologize that I ran over a bit, but I do appreciate your time and attention. No one fell asleep, so gold star for the room. Thank you so much for your time today.